Let's start it this way, Stan. You know, a lot of people are drawn to the world of not just UFOs, but paranormal consciousness, cryptids, either through like wheels on a spoke. They get hooked on UFOs and then they suddenly realize, hey, this leads me to cattle mutilations, to strange creatures, to Bigfoot, to consciousness issues, to poltergeists, as if they're all kind of mixed into one big pot in some way. What was the spoke on that wheel that got you started? Was it UFOs?
I've been involved in investigating UFOs, Bigfoot, and other phenomena for this year's 62 years of research. And interestingly, I've never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. 1969, I set up a hotline for the public to report UFO sightings. And actually, my interest started before that. I started when I was 10 years old in 1959 as a curious 10-year-old who was interested in science. And my parents coincidentally gave me an AM radio as a birthday gift, and it was during the Halloween season. And I was tuning around the AM radio dial, and I happened to hear a radio show talking about unusual happenings. They were talking about flying saucers and hauntings, and I was curious, and I went to the local library and began to read all the books they had on the subject. And it was in 1965 that the Kecksburg incident happened about 12 miles from where I live. And I started documenting that information as breaking on the news around the Pittsburgh area that evening. And how I got involved further was the fact that there was a small research group in the Pittsburgh area. It was called the UFO Research Institute, which is where Stanton Friedman started. So Stanton and several other fellows, most of these guys were engineers or scientists that were connected with some of the research facilities around Pittsburgh, and they had this small UFO group. Well, I became one of the members of the group. I was the youngster, as I remember, but I already had a lot of experience interviewing witnesses, so I became the telephone sighting coordinator. So when a report would come in, I would do the initial interviews and determine if the case warranted further investigation. So I stayed with that group until they closed down their operation, and in 1969, I set up a hotline for the public to report UFO sightings. That hotline has never ended. I get reports on the phone all the time. Calls come in day and night, and that never ends. So between email reports and phone reports, I continue to receive a lot of reports. So I've been out in the field again since 1965. And in 1970, I founded the first of three volunteer research groups. The first group was called the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. It was a small group that started here where I live in Greensburg, PA, and we extended in the Pittsburgh area. And the group was somewhat unique in that the majority of people involved were specialists. We had scientists, engineers, technicians, police officers, former military intelligence people, all kind of really reputable people. We all had our own full-time jobs, but I had it set up that we could respond to cases 24 hours a day. And by 1973, we had extended to cover the state of Pennsylvania. And we were very, very busy with many reports coming in, and we were actually surprised that we were beginning to get referrals on sightings from the news media, from law enforcement, and so it was just almost a full-time job, but we're not getting paid for it. And it was lucky that we were already set up, because 1973 comes around, and that was the largest UFO wave ever documented to happen here in Pennsylvania in 1973. With hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings that were going on from January 1st to the last day of the year. And, of course, back in 1973, we had no internet or no cell phones, but the local news media, the newspapers, were picking up a lot of the stories and sightings that were going on, then some of the statewide papers, and then some went to the national level as well. And all these UFO sightings were just amazing in itself, because a lot of these were not sightings that you could easily dismiss. And first of all, right in the beginning of our talk here, what I learned years ago, and still the same today, many UFO sightings are misidentifications. Many are determined to be either natural or man-made in origin. So there's a lot of UFO misidentifications, which many are familiar to witnesses and people out there. Misidentification of bright planets and stars, bright meteors, reentry of space debris. Of course, we had multitudes of Starlink satellite reports in the last couple of years that led to many reports. We have weather phenomena. So this goes on and on and on. And my position has always been to try to figure out an explanation before we think it's something more unusual. And so all those sightings were going on in 1973. But a lot of those reports were large, solid objects low to the ground, hovering over vehicles, over highways, pacing cars. There were cases where there were electromagnetic effects involved. It was an amazing time.
Well,
But
that,
it
that
got
was it.
much,
That year, Stan, that year was a national flap. It was 1973 was not just a Pennsylvania was a hot spot. The whole country was undergoing something similar, right?
right, but the U.S. flap actually peaked in the fall of 73. And there were a lot of states reporting activity, but this started in January of 73 and continued all year. And then in the summer of 73 here, we had this major Bigfoot outbreak that went on for weeks and months. And it was an amazing thing to get involved in. I interviewed multitudes of people, and my teams were out there. And that's when we began to realize that there was some really strange phenomena going on that we were never anticipating. When I got involved in this, knowing about the history of Bigfoot sightings around the country in Pennsylvania, which go back many, many years to Native Americans, I was always felt from what I knew about the information that Bigfoot was likely some type of unknown primate. But as these reports are coming in from widespread areas, and again, you got to remember, there's no internet back in those days, so a lot of people were calling the police departments to report what was going on, what they had observed or encountered. And first of all, a lot of these were daylight reports, and a lot of them were quite close range, very close range. But some very strange elements began to show up. And one of the first things was that my teams would get out to some of these locations, and various type of ground conditions, including fresh snow, would have these large footprints with a wide stride between them that would suddenly abruptly just stop. And there should have been more tracks. It made absolutely no sense. And it wasn't just one case. It was many cases. And by the way, that's continuing even in the last couple of years. And then we had witnesses who told us that they were seeing these creatures. But in some cases, people told us they would see as Bigfoot, even in daylight, at one particular location, then momentarily it would physically disappear and reappear somewhere else. And then it got stranger and stranger. That's when we began to get reports of UFOs and Bigfoot, some relationship. We saw a pattern. You would have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours or days later, there would be a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we had some of those amazing cases with UFOs and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And if you like, I can go into some detail about some of those incidents.
Yeah, let's do that. First, I want to ask you the obvious question is, you're involved in UFO research, tracking down cases and interviewing witnesses, and that's strange enough itself to people outside that topic. When you mix in Bigfoot, you really invite ridicule. You're seeing UFOs and Bigfoot, or witnesses are seeing the two of them together. What is the connection? Have you figured out a connection between those two phenomena and others that we will discuss here today?
Well, there is many unanswered questions. I think anybody who has been out there in the field doing firsthand investigation, doing serious research, these kind of reports that I sort of look into in the 70s, similar type of things are occurring throughout the country and around the world now. In the last few years, there's a lot more researchers and witnesses coming forward who are talking about these things going on, similar to what we had here, again, back in the 70s and since that time. And first of all, when we're dealing with the UFO phenomena, the more I know about it, the stranger it is in itself. I said years ago that there may very well be more than one origin to the unknown category of the UFO phenomena. And I keep an open mind to all possibilities. I don't have the answers, but I think that at least some of these reports, and we can talk about some of the what I call classic cases I've looked into over the years, could possibly be extraterrestrial. But then again, there are many, many cases of these objects, even in recent years, even this year, of objects that suddenly appear in the sky. They suddenly disappear. They disappear. At times, they physically change form. They, of course, do maneuvers that are unlike the technology our aircraft has today, or many, many years ago, going back at least the 60s when I was receiving these reports. We have some reports of people who are seeing very large, sometimes triangular objects. They can see the solid outline of this thing moving through the sky, but they can see through the object. So it appears as though we're dealing with a phenomena that has a physical and a non-physical component to it. They're here and they're gone. They appear and disappear. I think we're dealing with a phenomena right now is well beyond our present scientific understanding. And believe me, when myself and a lot of my team members and a lot of the people I work with were very skeptical. A lot of the researchers and scientists and engineers that I was involved with as volunteers back in the 70s in my groups, I mean, they had positions with some of the large companies in Pittsburgh and for colleges and whatever. And most of these fellows and women who were involved all kept anonymous because of their positions. But as we learned more about the data, as we investigated more reports, as we began to interview witnesses and see the evidence at the scene, you began to see there was something going on we didn't have an explanation for. And as you'll find as we talk about some of these Bigfoot cases, again, I had always thought that Bigfoot was an unknown type of animal, but there was more information starting to come in that we weren't out there looking for these type of things. This is what reports were coming in from the general public from widely separated areas. These people had no way of knowing at the time about these other reports. They were telling a similar type of phenomena occurring, and some of the cases that have turned up suggest that we're dealing with something that, again, is both physical and non-physical, which is why there's no bodies, and for a lack of a better term, they might be interdimensional.
Yeah, you can, a lot of scientists, engineers, even though they're wary, they get drawn to the UFO topic because they're thinking of these as structured craft from another planet that are here visiting us. When it gets into paranormal areas, Bigfoot, cryptids, animal mutilations, I imagine they get nervous. Well, I know they do because but you have to follow the evidence where it leads, right?
That's exactly it. Again, I wasn't out there looking for this type of phenomena. I wasn't out there looking for people telling me they've seen UFOs and Bigfoot together. And wait to hear the details about some of the cases I was involved in. It's just amazing. They were very well documented. And I don't have an explanation, but I put the data out there. I started writing about this back in the early 70s, so more people could learn about it. We get more input. And one thing I found back then was that a lot of people in the Bigfoot field back at that time, I found out, and this was not just the U.S., but even out of the country, that they were aware of these reports, but a lot of those researchers told me that they were not going to write about it. They were reluctant to discuss it because it was so strange and unusual, and that they didn't want to fear ridicule from their colleagues in the field. My position was, I don't have the answers. This is what's being reported. It's something that needs serious scientific study to find out what's going on, and it's been going on ever since.